Okay guys, so in this video I'm going to show you how to list, or rather how I implemented listing users for direct messages and stuff of that nature. So let's get into it. So if we go to our little chat application here, we can see that, hey, we have these two buttons here, channels and direct messages. And if I click channels, hey, we're showing the modal. Or the alert rather. And if I click direct messages, now we see this instead, which is basically just this panel for direct messages where we have a list of all the people who are part of this channel or this chat basically, and I can hover over them and all that good stuff. I don't really have any interaction or anything I can do with them at this point, because that's going to be the next thing we're going to do. And of course I can close this and I can open it again, and then I can say, hey, I can filter out my list here. So let's say full, and then let's say bar, and then that's my selection. So that's basically the functionality that we've added in this story. So let's have a look at that. So I updated my gitignore file, just removing the DS store that got generated, and nothing super important with that. And then we've added this endpoint here, where all we're going to do is basically we're going to get all the users. So get users in chat. That's all it's going to do. It's just going to list all of the users that we have, because right now we only have one chat, one channel. So we don't really have the concept of like switching between different company groups or anything like that, as Slack actually has the real version. But we might look at that later. And then we've updated our user service with get users in chat, which is a fairly small function, which is all it's going to do is that it's going to get all the users in the entire database, because hey, we only have one application, and ergo therefore there's just going to be basically every user who is a user in the system is going to be someone you can send a direct message to. And then I've updated my actions a little bit. So I started noticing, I felt that this reoccurring pattern, I've been copy pasting enough of this function here to warrant just creating a higher, an abstraction for creating this shape of an action. So I created this function here. All it does is that it takes in a type and returns a function that takes in a value, and then it returns an object that is just going to hold the type and the value. And that allows me basically to do this, where I can, instead of just redeclaring this over and over and over, I can just call create action with the type I want to have, and then that's going to return me the function that expects a value of any type, and that way I can just maintain the same interface without having to copy paste all this boilerplate. And also we've created this alert component, as you probably guessed, since we need to be able to show that alert, and that's been included in the main file. And here's a few other updates to our actions, but let's look at the alert. So the alert itself is this containing element. So basically everything you see around this area here, this is one separate component, which I call the direct messages, or the alerts direct messages. But the actual white area that covers the whole screen and being able to click the escape button like that, that's actually this component. So we have it's a very common case where you will have a modal of some sort, but you will have different content depending on which modal you want to show. And that's a very good practice in general to keep with you, that you don't want to create one modal for every single use case. You want to create a modal that can take a variable content, if you will. And that's exactly what we've done here. So this is my alert, and all it has is, it has an event handler and the ability to close the modal, and it's also a subscriber to the events stream, so we can close the modal. And if we look at the HTML here, it's fairly small. We have this little button, which is the escape button, which is, as you like, it's just going to call the close function. And then that's basically the header. And then we have this content container area where we have a reference to a title, and then we have a reference to content basically. And what we then do is that, hey, we have this on event handler, then, and if an action is equal to show alert, then we're simply going to switch out the title to the action's title, and we're going to basically grab the first child of the content, which is going to be the text here. And then we're simply going to replace that text, like that empty string there, with our new component, which is going to be included in the action. And then we're simply going to add the alert show class to our to the alert, and then that's going to actually set the display to show the alert. And for closing the alert, we simply remove that display, the alert show, and that's basically it. That's the entire functionality. So the CSS for the alert, we can just scroll through that pretty quick, because there's a bunch of styling here, and it's simply not feasible for us to go through every single line of styling. I just want to show you so you see that, hey, there's quite a bit of styling. Here are our alert actions. So these are the actions that we can dispatch. And here are the events. And then here is our bootstrapping file, where we basically just grab all of the different, like you see this like alert direct messages list, which is a subcomponent of the alert. So I want to include it here and not at the top level, because it's not used by any other component, so it doesn't make sense to put it in the main.js file, in my opinion. So we simply instantiate the alert model, and then we simply add it to, we basically bootstrap it to the main HTML file, which is what's happening here. So we've added this little bootstrap, like this data.js element here, so we can add it to the page. And yeah, that's about it, really. And then we have our alerts direct messages. So this is the content area which you saw earlier, where you actually have a list of all the users. And so we're going to have an event handler. We have this thing called filter users, and then we have a initial state, it seems. And maybe I don't even need that anymore. Yeah, that seems to be something that it's just left over. I forgot to move around that, so I'll just remove that. We don't need that. Anywho, we have render user and filter test user, or sorry, filter user. So let's just walk through that. Let's look at the content area first, or the render function. So we have a div and a form, which is just going to be, hey, this area, the input, and whenever we on key up, like basically when the user is typing and we lift the key, we're going to call filter users with the event. And that basically means that, okay, filter user is going to get the target value, which is going to be the input text, like what's in the text, or what's in the input, and it's going to dispatch filter direct messages, and that's about it, really. And then we have this UL, this user list basically, where we simply render out all of the users that we pass in as props, and that's about it, really. And render users is just this thing here where, alright, so we loop through all of the users, we instantiate a user list item, which is this tiny little component here. All it does is that it takes in some props, and when render is called, it simply returns a list element with some, like with that information added to the template, basically. And yeah, that's about it, really. And then of course we return the template element, so we can actually have a reference point to append all this to. Okay, and then on events, basically what's going to happen is that we're going to check if we want to filter direct messages. In other words, if somebody's dispatching this message here, or this action. And then we're going to grab all of the child nodes of the user list, which is our UL there, all these items, and then we set a regex, which is going to match the value of the action, because the action we dispatch is simply a text value, like the thing that was, as you see here, it's actually just the value of what's in the input. And then we create a regex that just checks if this, if it starts with this text that we're inputting. And then we loop through all of our list items, and we simply remove the hide for each and every one of them. And then we simply check if the data-username, so we're basically storing the username in this attribute here, just so we have a top-level reference, so we don't have to query or anything like that. We just want to be able to do a direct lookup or get the attribute directly from the list element. And then we simply check if it doesn't match. And if it doesn't match, we simply hide that element in the list. Easy peasy. So as we are typing, we will simply hide everything that doesn't match the regex. Okay, so that's about it, really. And then, of course, we have a little bit of bootstrapping code here to add the alert direct messages list to the window object. And here are some more action updates, just refactoring this stuff into something a little bit nicer. And here is where we actually include the alerts, or rather where this is basically just us creating the bootstrapping code for when we click. So basically all that this code here, just clicking on the sidebar. So we can actually look at that. So we're in the sidebar bootstrap part here. And basically all that's going to happen is, let's have a look at that a little bit closer. So originally all we had was this event listener that simply showed, hey, show create direct modal or message modal. But now instead we want to do this. So it's the same event listener, so we create an async function that's basically just going to get users in chat, which is just going to be an API call. We can look at that immediately. Users in API, get users in chat. So it takes the channel ID and it just does a fetch to the endpoint you saw earlier and returns all of the users that came back. And yeah, that's the whole thing. And so when we have all our users, we set the title to direct messages, and then we instantiate a new alert direct messages list with all of the users passed in. And then we reset the alert direct messages list on the window object to this thing here. And then we just create this data object with the title and the component, which is going to just be create element with our new little global reference here. And then we simply dispatch it. Now this is a little bit of a risk thing. Like the reason why we reset this thing here is because I want to make sure that whenever we actually show the modal and we have this alert direct messages list, I want to be sure that we always have the I mean, if we make this network call and there are new users in the chat, we need to make sure that all those users are included in the rendering of our content area here. And that's why we're like just reinstantiating this component and resetting it on the window object. Now this is a little bit dangerous. We have to be careful about this, because what we're doing now is that we are creating a global mutation on a mutation on a global object that could in theory be referenced somewhere else in our code base. So if somebody else is referencing this specific instance of our component, and that just magically gets changed because somebody clicked on this button, that's not really all that great. But right now I think this is safe. There's no real reason why we shouldn't do it, but we should be mindful of it, and we might find a nicer solution in the future. But for now, I think this is okay. Let's have a look at the sidebar actions, which is also this little refactor. And I added just a new color to our little palette here with variables. And we of course included our new components, C styling. And yeah, that's pretty much it. That's all the changes that we've made so far. So now we can go and we can move this card to ready for testing. And next is going to be to send direct messages. So let's have a look at that.